Here we go. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to the February edition of our Core Collective series. This is a string of events that uncovers learnings from inspiring leaders in the core, such as Spectra. Last month, we heard from David Cancel, the CEO of Drift, and this month, we are delighted to be speaking with Spectra Asala. Please give Spectra a warm welcome. Spectra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping rules. The goal of this event is to really gather collective learnings from the core community. That includes all of you. So we hope you'll add to the conversation. Please add any learnings and introduce yourself in the chat. We've also reserved time to answer your questions at the end of my discussion with Spectra. So please drop them in the Q&A section and raise your hand to ask Spectra questions yourself in the video. Feel free to also upvote on questions to ask her. We'll be live tweeting, and we hope you could join us. You can find us at _VC on Twitter. And lastly, if this is your first core event, welcome. You might be wondering what the _core is all about. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat that will share more about our community of top entrepreneurs, up-and-coming talent, domain experts who support each other as peers and also help source, select, and support our portfolio companies. With that, let's kick off the conversation. A bit about Spectra. She is a product and UX strategist and technology leader with about 15 years leading brand, product, and market growth for tech startups and social impact ventures across the globe. Originally from Nigeria, she's an MIT alum who has lived and worked on 5 different continents, but built several successful ventures from the ground up and regularly speaks about product leadership, innovation, culture, and the future of work. Many different areas of expertise. She's currently the GM and VP of product at Wistia. Before that, she led product and experience design strategy from Jumia Technologies, the largest consumer operator in Africa, Flywire, a market leader in global payments in Boston and a new unicorn, and Cogito, a disruptive AI conversational coaching platform. Really excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get into it. You have an incredibly impressive background, as we just highlighted in your bio. How did you originally get involved in the product world?
How I got involved in product. I guess I could tell the story of always working in technology. I mean, my first job outside of college was in a tech startup. So I've always been an operator. I've always worked at tech startups. But I would say that actually I came to product through like two weird things: community organizing, yes,
love it,
as an activist, and then eventually when I was a CEO of a venture-backed startup in the ride-sharing space in Nigeria. So the first entry point, being a community manager, I accidentally stumbled upon this. I was a young 20-something trying to find other people like me, LGBT person of color. And this was, I'm dating myself, but this was back in the day when it was like MySpace, and
oh yeah,
MySpace, Friendster, Craigslist for the way you promoted events. And I felt quite alone as a person of color that found myself in LGBT spaces, and I wanted to meet other folks. And so I put up a post on Craigslist and spammed people. And I was like, I found a restaurant in Dorchester, D-Bar, that let me corner off about like an area for about 15 people or so. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to have a few people show up. Like, I don't actually think there's that many like LGBT people of color in Boston. And, whoever shows up, I'll get my 4 Sex and the City friends and it'll be cool. And that evening, like over 150 people showed up. He thought I scammed him and I didn't want to pay to buy it out. And then, and then just much like, the wonderful events that Underscore hosts in Boston, I hosted tons of events and I built a really, really big community and ran it for about 8 years in Boston. And so the path to product, I've always worked in tech and then eventually found my way into the product function. I would say that much of my interest in understanding consumers, understanding how to design experiences that resonate and how to balance, because it was a little bit of an ecosystem, a little bit of a marketplace. I had this community, people wanted to promote stuff to this community. I had to balance their needs and also our partners' needs and sponsors' needs. So balancing that and balancing different stakeholders, getting feedback from people in the community and then iterating via different events. We built a media platform, was how I got into it. And then more formally, after sort of a stint as an entrepreneur doing go-to-market strategy and brand strategy for tech startups and social impact ventures across the continent, I was recruited to lead like the Series A, the Series A startup I just mentioned, Easy Taxi, which was one of Jumia's portfolio companies. And if you have any experience in ride sharing, it's especially early adopting like ride sharing, it was all about the product. And in Africa, it's all about payments. That's how you grow. So I spent most of my time as we were growing that business in the payments product space. And that's actually how I ended up at Flywire when I moved back to the States. Amazing.
I love that connection. So, obviously, you have a great background in building product orgs. So what's something that really has helped you succeed there?
Succeed with an asterisk. There's still scars. So thinking about what helps me build them, was that the question? What helps me build product orgs?
Yeah, what has helped you succeed in doing that?
Well, I think I am naturally curious. I know that's like a cliche thing to say, but so I'm on the spectrum. Not a lot of people know that. And so when I was growing up, interacting with other people was challenging. I was always offending people inadvertently. I still struggle with bluntness and, just so socially awkward, just occupying a socially awkward space. And so I read a ton of books about people, personality quizzes. I'm a big personality typing junkie. And so I was naturally curious about people, and it became fun. It became just understanding people, understanding what motivated them, and just people's experiences was really interesting to me. So I think, first off, my curiosity, if I'm part of a company, is because I think they have something. I'm excited about their product. I'm excited about the problem that it solves. Yeah. And I genuinely, when I get on a call with a customer or a user, I'm not there sort of going through a script and, sort of plopping them into frameworks. I really am genuinely curious about how to make their lives better. And that scope, one of my challenges is that I will zoom out and figure out sometimes things beyond our product to do that, because startups are a solution, they're a perspective on a solution. And so sometimes it's I think zooming back into the scope of the problem as defined by that startup is important. But yeah, my curiosity, resilience, I don't know, just product can be challenging because every company defines it differently. There are a lot of moving parts. It's all about managing relationships. I just mentioned, interacting with people has been a lifelong challenge of mine. So it's a complex terrain to navigate. And so I think my resilience, curiosity, and honestly, I'm a nerd. I enjoy it. I enjoy working with technology. I enjoy working with engineers and design. I love making things, and so it's fun for me.
Sounds like you found the perfect fit for yourself then.
Yeah.
I know you've also shared that you have kind of a consultant mindset. How has that helped you when you're thinking about building, product type of organizations?
So when I used to do consulting, and actually I jumped back into it about a year ago, and then decided I missed making things and jumped back to being an operator. But I think the thing with consultants is that you're always learning. You go into industries and there's this balance between knowing enough to make some decisions and to make sound recommendations, but constantly learning as you're doing it. And so understanding the map very quickly of the players, ecosystem, the product, the business, the customers is an imperative for consultants to be successful. The worst thing for a consultant is to go into a room and share, this is what I think of your business, this is what I think you should do, and then you miss something completely and everyone's like, this person's an idiot, right? Yeah. So there's I think taking a consultant point of view, even as an operator, when I join a business, I spend maybe sometimes perhaps too long sort of observing and trying to understand the dynamics, how the team works, what product means there. I mean, because sometimes, I mean, even a company will say, this is how we build products. They'll use familiar terms and familiar words, but you find it's actually slightly different from what you understand. So I spend a lot of time observing. Usually within my first 30 to 60 days, I'm scheduling one-to-ones with all of the functional leads. I'm joining channels and just trying to figure out like just getting to the heart of the company so that I can anchor myself and then start to make decisions. So I think that space, it's easy to join a company and be like, where's my quick win? And let me show that they made a good decision to hire me. But I have found through past mistakes that at least for me, it's been much better to hang back a little bit and kind of understand what you're working with before jumping in and getting to know people and building trust, so.
Yes, obviously I think trust is one of the cornerstones to building relationships as well. Yeah. Without that, you really have nothing.
Yep.
So, you work with product teams, you're on a product team. And so product teams obviously gather feedback, prioritize competing demands, orchestrate work across teams, and plenty more. So much of that comes down to communication.
Yeah.
Are there systems or processes that you've used to facilitate conversation as a product leader?
All of our tools. I mean, I'm an early adopter for everything. Love Slack, Zoom, like all the tools, Trello, all of them, and using them intelligently, right? And so communication, especially in a remote environment. I'll caveat my responses here by saying I've primarily worked for global companies like most of my career. It's been rare up until very recently that I didn't have regular conference calls with people with different accents, just sort of like my proxy, and people in different time zones. And I find that there's a discipline there that, frankly, I haven't experienced in sort of in-person companies. There's a lot, we could just drive by and talk. It's a lot of just sort of organic communication, which has its pros, but when it comes to communication, because I've worked in global companies and I had to think about, I've got 2 hours overlapping with this person. I need to get on a call and figure out like what we need to do. And we need to find a way to collaborate and still stay in sync, even though we might be, building the ship at a different rhythm. And so I think using the tools that we have, available in a smart way, understanding, is this a meeting to discuss, brainstorm, jam? Is this a meeting to quickly align? So can people, get materials beforehand? So we use this 30 minutes really effectively. So just general communication stuff, which I think goes beyond products. But then within products, the other thing I would say is there is this, it's an emerging mental model for me, but I find that product is is the API between the technology and the sort of the technology part of the business and sort of the market facing. And so in many different ways, I find that my role, I enjoy it more and more effective when I consider myself as translating between different departments, and seeing anytime I share something, not just sharing the thing and this is what we're going to do, but sharing how I came to it, sharing the framing I'm using, sharing the mental model I'm using, so that you basically coach the organization to speak your language and speak a shared language. And so I find that the product function, when it's healthy, does that really well. People use persona and buyer persona and other personas in the same way. People use the word agile in the same way, because the product function is actively sharing frameworks that sort of pull all of these different functional nuances that come from different functions together. And so, yeah.
How do you implement that? How do you bring that across, a larger team?
That's like a
$1 million question.
I would say, I'll answer it in steps. I think I'll tell you what I've done, because I think it is a playbook at this point. I would start with a small team. You go in and, if there's a sort of established language that's working, plugging in is easy and you're not really changing much. But the companies that I've joined, because I join companies in growth stage, typically they're going through organizational change, typically establishing or building our product function. So some of my role is often organizational development and design as well. And, you're introducing new processes, you're trying to expand, create more space for more complexity as the business becomes more complex or needs to handle and address complex market dynamics. And so I think what I always recommend is picking one team, like a small one, 45, typically yours. So start with a small inner circle. And if it's a new tool or a new concept you want to, it's just the team needs an active project, like a thing that's real that they're working on. And it needs to be small enough that you can convince people to try this thing. And then you need to do it, and then you need to slay it. And then everyone needs to be like, what did you do? And then you can start to bring in more teams. So I usually start from a very small team. I built that team, they become evangelists, and then it starts to sort of propagate on its own. But the way to fail very fast, which has happened to me, is to come in and be like, we want to change this entire system, and the language is wrong, and et cetera. And there's always a little bit of that tension, but trying to take all of that on. One, you're new, you haven't established trust, you haven't actually maybe done anything, and so you have to show that it works. The product community is very generous, I think, in sharing. We publish a lot. There's articles, Medium articles, Twitter posts. Like, the product community is very strong, and it's one of my favorite things is that if you're someone new, you could find something to read. Someone has explained it. Someone has written. But it does get to be quite theoretical, and ultimately, in companies, it's the how does it work? What does this mean for how we work together? What does this mean in terms of our interactions every day? That really matters. And so you can sort of share a concept, and everyone will not. No one will ever disagree that, oh yeah, this mental model makes sense. What they'll sort of be hesitant or reserved about is trying it without seeing what it should look like and how it should work. So I find that when I model it myself through my team, and then a bigger team, and then a bigger team. And if it makes sense, then it catches on. And the parts that don't make sense, we discard. And so thinking of your, another cliche, but I do take this to heart, thinking of your team as another product as well, and how you work, the ways of working as an experience in of itself, and evaluating it by its effectiveness in driving outcomes for the company and people signing on.
How do you deal with pushbacks in those situations?
How do I deal with it? Case by case. Again, I'm a curious person. And it depends on the stage too. Like, if I'm still 2 months in, I do tend to defer a lot more because I don't know. And I'm just like, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe, there's something I've missed. But if I've been there a while, I've started to form a point of view. I will typically make sure that we are aligned on the framework to which to discuss the disagreements, just so we make sure we're disagreeing and we're not just using different words and thinking that we are. And then if we are, then it's, obviously case by case basis. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. The data should just let us know. If it's my domain of decision making, my opinion will win in the absence of data. And if it's not, I'll defer to whoever is leading. But philosophically, and just maybe a little crassly, I'm a Black woman in technology. I'm used to pushback all the time, and I navigate it the way I navigate the rest of my life, which is that there's some signals you get that make sense. There's some signals that are just a sort of a symptom of the system you're in, good or bad, and and some that you should just like not pay attention to because they're not relevant to what you're trying to do. Yeah.
That's helpful. Yeah, obviously, I think case by case situation, but then learning from that and trying to see how that applies elsewhere. So thank you. That's really helpful. So before Wistia, you worked at many distributed and global organizations.
Yes.
Wistia is, I think, known for having this vibrant office culture with a close-knit team. But
I didn't participate.
Obviously, nowadays, Wistia is working remotely. What lessons have you learned about fostering connectedness through your, experiences with distributed teams?
Well, the first thing is this is an active conversation at Wistia, and I'm sure many companies that had a strong in-person culture, or even any in-person culture, and trying to figure out how to both stay productive, keep employees and team members engaged, and it's a common conversation. I'll tell you what I have learned in the past, recently, from Wistia, is that you have to acknowledge, and I'm speaking very specifically about pandemic, you have to acknowledge the loss. I found myself doing this. It was like, we're remote now. Great. Thank God. Companies have said that we couldn't be remote. Like, okay, great. Just like get it together. And obviously the smart companies, smart leaders know they need to do that. But you do have to reckon with the fact that there are friendships we're talking about. There are friendships in the office. There are people that you like. There are people you spend time with. You spend at least 40 to 60 hours, maybe more with these folks every week. And that is a loss. And I don't think that in this environment, you can move on and actually re-engage the org in this new world if you don't acknowledge that. I don't think we can sort of just complain about it consistently, but it needs to be acknowledged, and there needs to be space for people to talk about, what they've, what they miss. But then outside of that, right, considering that we're all in an unprecedented and working a precedented situation globally, I also think that the other mistake that I've seen that companies make is, well, the global companies, they always have the age-old problem of like, how do we create a sense of our company, even though people are in different countries, sometimes speaking different languages.
Yeah.
And what I have learned, and I think a diversity and inclusion lens is really important here, that people actually feel more anchored when locally could be a place, it could be a team, it could be a Slack channel, it could be a private Slack channel. People feel more anchored, and so therefore willing and more confident to explore and re-engage with the larger once they have sort of that close-knit community. And so the mistake global companies will make will be like, if we have maybe 6 different locations, and every location feels a little different, and they're proud that they are, Wistia Paris versus Wistia New York. I have seen the natural tendency to try and like squash that and be like, we are one company, they're like, we are one. But it's just like saying that we are one America. It's just not, people are not going to feel anchored and connected to the country if they don't feel connected to the parts of their identity that matters. And so I find in the global context, for companies, transitioning from an in-person to remote, it does fall a little bit more on the functional leads and the managers to create that smaller ecosystem, to create that sense of intimacy that we used to get when we went into a room and we had our weekly meeting and the door was shut and we joked about stuff and we had a relationship that was maybe different from what we have with the rest of the company. And you have to simulate that. And so it falls from, we can rely a little bit on people teams and employee engagement teams in an in-person culture. They'll create events, there's stuff going on all the time. And remotely, there are so many dimensions you can play with it to create that. And so it really does come down to, creating that smaller ecosystem of your team. And practically for me, that has looked like making sure my team has a smaller team channel, is private, and people will be like, everything should be public. Nope, this is just for my team. And there will be a broader channel where my team can engage with everybody, but we have that quiet space where people can share things about their mom or what they're struggling about because they want to know each other well. And you need that quiet because otherwise it feels like you're in a hall with 300 people just talking to, no one. And that's not comfortable. So I find that once people have that, then they feel great. They feel happy. They're like, yes, I love working here, and what they're saying is I love my team, right? It's the team that matters. So that's what I would offer there.
Awesome. No, that's really helpful. How do you think, if we do go back to in person, are there learnings that you've had from Wistia or from virtually in general that you think can be applied once you go back in person?
I hope that I'm going to make a declarative statement. It doesn't make me popular, but I find that companies who have more experience working with distributed teams they're just better with communication. And when I say communication, I mean the balance between announcements versus brainstorms, because you have to be really particular because we only have so many channels. So the nuances of using those channels for different communication goals, they've had longer to practice. And so remote working forces companies to have to think through how they're communicating, the cadence of their meetings, how long they are, who's running them, facilitation, which is actually a skill that most people just sort of like walk into, but to run a good meeting, takes practice, and to run a remote meeting takes practice.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that when, as we start to, settle into hybrid versions, or hybrid working arrangements, that the learnings about communication don't go away, that it doesn't all of a sudden go back to back-to-back meetings for 8 hours a day because we're not using asynchronous channels, and we're not, I hope that's preserved, because I think it makes us more efficient. And I hope we also, for the folks who are still remote, if we practice that sort of like remote first mindset, even if you are some people in the office, some people are not, it makes sure that your workforce, your team feels included, right? So if one person's on the camera, we're all on camera, even though there's 5 of us in person. We're all gonna log in and into the Zoom because somebody else is. We're not gonna throw out times of the day when we can meet without being specific about the times of tiny things like that. I hope we hold on to.
Cool. So there's one thing that I'm really excited to ask you. So I know last summer you worked on a contract tracing software, which is so cool.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that? What kind of work were you doing? How did you go about building it?
Yes. So last year, when the pandemic, hit, and the country was the world was in crisis, I found myself, and there were other personal things. I lost a good cousin, a close cousin good cousin, bad cousin. This was a good cousin. He was also a close cousin last year. And it makes you sort of reevaluate your life and how you're spending your time. Yeah. And I've always been someone who's mission driven. I told you I came to a product through community organizing, creating like social spaces, safe spaces for people. And I wanted to start to reconcile and bring together my strong interest in making a difference and, my background in technology. And so the Pathcheck Foundation, which is a spin out of the MIT Media Lab, there's a professor there, scholar there, that had come up with some proprietary Bluetooth technology that enabled contact tracing in a way that preserved privacy. All of that was Greek to me. I was just like, how are we going to get people to use it? And so I started volunteering with it. It was an open source project. And I started first by being curious and listening to what we were doing. I quickly found out that we were designing a product and not many people were speaking to the actual people who were going to use it. So I did some user research and, shared. And long story short, I got deeper and deeper involved. And then I was asked, when it was formally established as a foundation, to lead the product team. And by lead, it was build a product team from people all over the world, include this hybrid model of some agency, because we needed an agency to work on the delivery piece, and people volunteering. So it was interesting. I had a team of designers, engineers, product leaders in different time zones, and some of them were consultants and paid, and some of them were volunteers. And so it was a really interesting dynamic. But I kind of just followed the same. What I just shared now about starting with a small team, it started with a very, very small team, one squad, and then I built another squad, and then I built another squad. So by the time at the end of the summer, when we had built the product that has now been rolled out in Minnesota, Hawaii, Guam, it's sort of being used. Yeah, I know, it's really
amazing.
Yeah, but by the time we ended, I had, I think, at least 4 or 5 squads. It was analytics. There was a bunch of different teams that I was working with, and they were running like an engine. It was fun.
That's so cool. You must have learned so much from doing that. What were some of your best takeaways?
Ooh, best takeaways. Language matters. When you're trying to assure people of safety in different parts of the world with different norms and different, I think an easy thing is let's translate. But there's something about culture and sort of the norms in a place that is not always captured by literal translations. And then on the flip side, there are problems that we try to solve in products that I think sometimes we forget that words are a vehicle for, they're an element of experience design. It's usually get a designer on there. We're playing with graphical elements and interactions and navigation. But sometimes a good UX writer or copywriter just changes just a few things, and you're like, oh, that works, that makes sense. So language matters, words matter, especially in products that are now coaching people, products that are pervading more and more of our lives. I think fintech, I think criminal justice system, I think legal tech, and that the user education is really important. That we shouldn't over rely on, graphics and I guess and traditional sort of product design interventions.
Are you still in touch with the group that's creating it?
I just had a scotch with one of the lead product leaders yesterday, literally yesterday.
Amazing.
Yeah,
How big is the team now?
Sorry?
How big is the team now?
I don't know. I rolled off when I accepted my role at Wistia. I ran the. Yeah, I was there for 6 months because it was volunteer, and then
Sure.
later was a more significant project. But yeah, so I'm not actually sure. I have been so head down at Wistia, like learning about our industry, enjoying getting to know folks at the company. Quite honestly, for the first time in my career, like really just being part of an organization that cares about some of the things that I do. And before it was trendy. Yeah. So diversity and inclusion is really important there. It's important to me. I love the team at Wistia.
I know so many people and companies are trying to, implement more diversity and inclusion initiatives. Are there things that, that Wistia has done really well, or things that you personally think can make a big impact, on a company level?
The leaders are brave. I think, and I will put myself in this category as someone, who is mainly still an activist masquerading as a technologist. But I used to, so the language of social justice has become more accessible. We can say systemic racism now. 10 years ago, that would have been like, what? But these are concepts that came from scholars and social justice leaders, that had to create a framework and language to talk about change and talk about the changes that we need. But in a way, I think what has happened is it's become such an intellectual discussion that in many ways it intimidates people from engaging. It's like for us, you and I to have a conversation, or, someone I just met to have a conversation, it's like, they need to take a women's and gender studies class, a civil rights class, like they need to go through all the things, with me. And I don't think that sets us up for success. And so I like and encourage reframing these conversations about being good people, but not in a fluffy way, but being a good friend. If your friend was complaining, crying about something, would you tell them that it's not there? I don't know. It sounds really simplistic, but, just sort of focusing on making sure people feel seen and heard. I feel like we have the tools to do that already. We do that in our lives, we do that with our friendships. And I just think that the ether of the intellectual discourse, I think, distracts people from that. And that we need to work, I'm going to come back to language, and that we need to come back to more accessible ways of communicating these concepts in a way that people can understand. So I think what Wistia has done well, and I've seen other companies do well, is recentering this conversation as like an employee experience conversation. And just like we design products for so many different kinds of people, how might we design a place to work, a way of working that ensures that, and you can be specific, this group right here, as well as this group right here, feels like they belong. And I think when framing it as a question about experience, one, it's framed as a question. And I think you need to be brave and courageous to listen to the answer, typically from those people. So I'm not a big fan of all the best places to work awards. I'm just like, for who?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I like what you said also about the workplace almost as a product.
Yeah.
And talking to the right people and making sure your audience is, engaged in the way that the end goal is for you and for them as well.
Yeah. And that's probably leaning more towards, that's from my community manager days. I was searching for my 4 Sex and the City friends, right? And then with this large community, people older than me, people who had been activists, people like executives, and I was like a 20-something. I knew nothing. Yeah. I knew nothing, Jenny. And so
that's amazing.
How do you
knew
decide?
Something. You got 150 people there.
Not enough, but also, not enough to get all of the people I wanted to come, right? And so you had to get. I remember like harsh feedback I got from a trans person who came to my event and mentioned that that they liked coming, but then they called me out on the way I talked about the event, who was welcome, etc. And I hadn't considered it. And, most people look at me, I'm a woman of color, and there's this like, you're a woman of color, so you should know everything about all of the social justice issues. But we all got our blind spots. And, at the time it was like, well, how do I make that better? And we did. And as a result, we saw more engagement there. And it's being willing to listen, being willing to say that you don't have all the answers, that you're wrong. And failing openly, right? And I think people, when they see you trying, maybe I'm naive, but I do think it resonates when people see you openly trying.
Not just saying you're going to try.
Not just saying we're going to do it. You're like, the performance, the feigned performance, the performances that we're all very used to sniffing out right now. So companies that genuinely try, there's hope for everyone.
Yes, and I know also people that actually lay out what they're going to be doing, as in just saying like, "Oh, we'll improve." Okay, but how? I think that's incredibly. I've seen companies do it right that are actually showing the steps they're going to be taking, and then
and that itself, I think that's better than not, no accountability. But I also think that sometimes I have my pet peeve about that, like in products, when it's like, okay, great, we're going to solve this problem. Great. What is it going to look like? How's it going to work? We're like, whoa, we're still trying to figure out, we need to understand the landscape. We need to have some conversations. We need to understand what our competitor, we need to think, right?
Yeah.
And thinking as work is like a dying concept sometimes. I think.
Not just jumping in and doing, but actually figuring out.
Right. Like you could have these plans. What if these plans are just stupid? Like what if they're not the right ones? What if they're pointing at the wrong, North Star? And if you've taken just a little bit of time and paused and held the discomfort of not having the answer, just held it a little longer. And you said, even for D&I, we are going to start working for it. We know that is an uncomfortable, that is not a place we want to be in a couple of months. But here are the problems we are going to tackle first. We are going to make sure that our Black employees and that future Black employees and Black people in our ecosystem or our business feel, and that starts with us learning. And so that's what we're going to be doing for the next few months versus here's our plan. We're going to hire these many people. We're going to sponsor a ton of events and not really show up to them and give employees free tickets. It doesn't really do anything, but you saying that I am going to tackle a problem and be clear about when you're going to, come back with things more concrete, and they can get more specific as you learn more. Again, much like product, I think is the better way to go than coming up with a really sophisticated plan that's clearly tone deaf to people who have a little bit more experience than you.
Yeah, I could go on this conversation with you, till forever. I would love to continue talking about this offline as well, but also want to make sure that we get to some of the audience Q&As because there's a lot of excitement to ask you questions. That's okay.
Yeah.
So D is asking, would love to learn more about your feelings around personas, and if so, how do you?
Oh no. Okay. How do I oh God. Okay. I do not use personas. I don't, and I'll explain why. I do not use personas. I think that they are a great tool for facilitating, evangelizing empathy in a company. If you construct, with some feedback, I hope it's based on feedback and data, and you construct some archetypes or personas that you can use in storytelling and sort of bringing the emotional part of what we do as product leaders to the center of the conversation. I think that's great. I think that they are a poor tool for design and that they are responsible for many of the biases and exclusionary experiences that we have today, because yeah, I use jobs to be done. I prefer to solve for the thing that a person is trying to do. And I don't care if the person is 65 or the person is from Nigeria, or like if they're trying to do this thing, then whoever is trying to do this thing, I have a solution for you. Versus Bob, who's 56, and then you forget about Susie, who's 18. I just don't think it, personally, for designing products, it makes sense. But I can see the appeal, and I do encourage them as a way to tell stories and rally people around conceptual vision for the product.
Awesome, that's really.
I'm gonna get in so much trouble for just saying that.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I'm sure that's might be a kind of controversial opinion, but. Rick is asking, product is increasingly playing a leading role across marketing org too. How have you found success in stewarding success alongside product marketing and growth?
This sounds like a recommendation, which I agree with. I am a huge fan. The part of product that I enjoy most is growth. I think it's a little bit because, I build community, so business development. I worked in enterprise sales for a while. I like numbers. I like that they're practical. And yeah, we have metrics to measure different, parts of product. But the closer you get to growth and like actual acquisition, I get excited. So I like the. We just actually onboarded someone who calls herself a smarketer. So uniting sales, marketing, and product, which I love. And I find that products for sales in enterprise, I'll speak about enterprise, so that's primarily my experience. In terms of sales and products working together, I think sales is a good pulse for how sales is selling product and sometimes what the market is asking for and the gaps that we have, and can be great in informing roadmap. I find customer success is actually the closest partner I have in enterprise companies, because they're talking with our users and our buyers like on a consistent basis. And they're typically tasked also with driving adoption to some degree. And so since that's typically a metric that product owns or shares, it's a natural collaboration. There are functions now called growth, and again, language matters. I think anyone that is in the business of trying to use the product to attract more customers or keep them needs to work with the product team, which is basically the entire org.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question. Okay. What are the frameworks that you choose in deciding between whether customers should suggest features or one should use their own intuition in deciding features for the product?
That's a good question. Let me think about that. I feel like I do have sort of a gut, but I've never had to articulate it out loud. I just was having a conversation with someone on my team the other day where they wanted to get feedback from our users. And I remember saying a little bit flippantly, like, it's not going to help us make that decision. I think we are taught, and in many ways, and I've also seen like you're shamed in product and technology if you don't say you should talk to the user. It's like a thing everyone says now. But the truth is, I find that in optimizing a solution, absolutely, like getting feedback from the people who are actually using it and coming up with something new, talking to people like, using your current solution, ideally people who are not, honestly, is a good, and people on the periphery is a good place to source inspiration. No idea is ever, I wouldn't weight ideas based on who's sharing them. Like a good idea can come from anywhere. I genuinely believe that. Some of the best things I've built weren't my ideas. But I do, where I do see a separation is in if I'm optimizing something, absolutely the people using it, in addition to other people we anticipate using it, should be the anchor. And if you're building something, we should be brave and we should be audacious in exploring the domain, of the user, around the user, and using the good old creativity that I'm pretty sure we all have.
I love it. It sounds like it's sometimes not an easy decision to make, right?
No. And it's like, I mean, like you try stuff that works, you try stuff that doesn't work. Certainly once giving people something to react to, all the time. I love giving people things to react to, including if they're like, that's terrible, tell me why, right? Because that itself could get you to go down one path versus the other. But yeah, I tend to find that people saying, let's talk to the user about solving this thing that no one else has solved, and they don't even have the mental model to they're not even like thinking about it as a problem right now because they've solved around it. They're just coping, right? It's not typically where you would get ideas for what to build, but it's always very good for identifying the problems that you could focus on.
If there were, are there a certain amount of users or customers that come to you with the same problem? Is it then like, yes, I need to build this, or do you not really have a thinking that way?
Sorry, can you clarify the question? Sorry, I don't think I got the question.
Sorry. So if, all of a sudden all of your customers are saying, we want this to be built, or we need this to be built a certain way, are you thinking like, they're right, this should be done, or are you more using, your product knowledge and expertise on the product to be like, that's probably actually not what you want?
Yeah, a little bit of both, right? I mean, once you work, if you work in enterprise specifically, and I'm sure this is the case for other types of businesses, but you will come across a similar set of problems. Oh, we're selling to a large organization. They have a HRIS, their employee where they manage their employees, and they have 500 people, and so we can't force them to add users one by one. We're going to need an integrate, so there's some very like obvious sort of problem spaces really around just enabling the enterprise to use your product and get to the core value of your product. But we are living in a time where customers, they use the same apps I do. They use the same products I do. Back like when I first started, there were people that were IT people, and there were people that worked on computers, and then there was everyone else. But now they're fairly sophisticated. They think they're really sophisticated. If they're telling you this is like shit because this other company does that, it's worth listening to. And so, yeah, I think unilaterally, either way, I wouldn't say just because a customer is telling me, something means that we should build it, nor the other way. That if, so it really depends. And the depends comes down to, is this part of our vision? Is this within the domain of something we should be solving? Is it something we should be solving now? Mm-hmm. And does it make sense for our business? And does it make sense for our business? Typically should be aligned with, does it make sense for the customer in the long term? And for our priorities. But that's kind of how I think about it.
I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
Who knows?
Exactly. It's one mind frame or time. Yeah.
Common misperception about me that I'm not warm.
Why do you think that? Or why do you think that's a common misperception?
Bias. I've got it's a lower voice. It sometimes can come across as monotone. I'm serious about my work. And if you don't work very closely with me, you'll have no idea that I'm an idiot and a clown. And, you will have my team knows I'm, they'll because they see me all the time. But I think in larger groups, because groups have always made me uncomfortable, if I'm honest, I tend to be more reserved. So if I say, I'm responding to that question about misperception because that's typically someone far away. So folks will look at me and say, oh, you've done all these things, or she's very quiet. And then she, says 6 words at the end of the meeting or something. And so I think I can come across as either aloof or, disinterested. But it's really just because I'm shy in groups. And, I'm an immigrant to this country. I came here, my parents sent me here when I was 17. And I didn't come here to play. I came here to make their sacrifices worth it. So there is a seriousness to how I approach my work and how I see other immigrants or first generation approach their work that I'm comfortable with, but sometimes, especially in American culture, it's like, oh, you should relax and let's small talk. I'm very bad at small talk. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy my work. And so I think I come across as serious and stern and standoffish, but Helen is so sweet, a brilliant clown. But I'm silly and I sing a lot and hum a lot when I'm working and with my team, and yeah.
I love it. Well, you've always come off very friendly and warm and smart, and I guess, yes, a silly clown. So it looks like we have one more audience question, and then I want to ask you one question as well. I love that you say we need to acknowledge the loss of being remote. What are some of the gains you've seen that you'd like to see sustained post-pandemic?
Yes, that's a great question. I think I mentioned just the paying attention to communication and cadence. People are zoomed out, and it's not great, but it is also great that people are zoomed out, because it means they're asking questions like, do we actually need do we need to meet? And how I find this is the most that's happened in my entire career, that people are trying to optimize around not meeting, right? Because they're tapped out. And so I find that the gains in efficiency and the gains in alignment by being forced to communicate to the right channel at the right time, etc. I think that's great. This is not something that is for everyone. I mean, for me, it's been really nice to feel like I'm working now in a more level playing field. As, again, a woman of color in technology, I can't tell you how many after work drinks I didn't want to go to, but I knew it'd be obvious if I didn't go. Everyone will notice that the Black girl's missing. So like, why is she not coming, right? And so just the pressure to do that, I'm sure there's still side DMs and stuff, but I do think that there's a little bit more democratization of information across the company. Just being able to DM the CEO is normal. For folks who are just starting out, like DMs to anyone has been normalized. And so I think more accessibility across the organization, I'd love to keep before we default back to our natural human tendency of clicks and these people are like me, so let's go hang out and discuss work after work where other people don't have access, and the inequities that we've started to talk about a lot as an industry just continue. So I would say the communication and the accidental inclusion of people.
Yes, I'm very interested to see what's going to be changing once we get back and how that works, and hopefully some of the your suggestions will carry on as well.
So
I have one final question for you. I know we discussed this a little bit prior to this Fireside chat. I would love to hear, what's a contrarian view you hold about product?
Well, I already gave away the personas one. Oh God, they're not terrible. I just don't use them for design, like for me to design new products. So that's one. It doesn't make me very, very popular. The other, again, I mentioned the product community is really generous. They write a lot, they share a lot. There's all these frameworks, all these new drawings of how we work all the time, every day, all day. I don't think product is that hard. I don't think the products of products management is hard, or the products of product leadership is hard. I think it's the management and the leadership that is hard. And I think we focus on the wrong things. We focus on this framework, jobs to be done versus personas, whereas I think we should be spending more time developing and coaching the next generation of product leaders that'll not make the mistakes that I would say that we've been making, bias in AI, people being sent to jail early because the algorithm was wrong. Like, I think we should be focusing on building the next generation of leaders. Product people are, I think anyone can become a CEO, but I think the thinking and the training you get there certainly positions you to be a great investor or an entrepreneur. And those people are going to build businesses. I want to make sure that we're building leaders that are going to want to build businesses that solve real problems, but also places that people want to work, right? And I don't know how we'll get there if we keep focusing on whatever artifact or acronym for the month, and not spending as much time on how we're training, growing, attracting people to the industry and to the field in a way that's equitable and focused on values.
Well, I'm so excited to continue following you in your career because I know you're going to be doing really big things. So,
yeah. Still looking for my 4 Sex in the City friends.
Well, I'm happy to be one.
Yeah, no, still building community. I'll probably always be building community, building products, building teams. Literally 3 of my favorite things.
That's wonderful. It's so nice to be able to find the things that you're the most passionate about and be able to go out and do it.
Yeah.
Very lucky. Well, that being said, you're getting a lot of love in the chat. Thank you so much, Spectra. This was so wonderful. I learned a ton from you. I hope everyone else did as well. I could carry on this conversation all night, but I'll let you go and have your scotch.
Yeah, thank you. It feels like Thursday, even though it's only Tuesday, but it's fine. Thank you for having me.